If God were good, rather than bad, or bad rather than good, or if he were small, rather than great, or great rather than small, or if he were right, rather than wrong, or wrong rather than right, or if he were virtuous, rather than evil, or evil rather than virtuous, or if he were happy, rather than miserable, or miserable rather than happy, he would be finite, and not infinite. It is only by being above duality, is God infinite.
In 1928, on a small hill in a remote part of India, 10 years after the end of the Great War, a striking man with long hair and mustache emerged from a small room built above a pit in the earth where he had been fasting. He stated that in the previous night, he and other masters of the spiritual hierarchy had decided that another great war, much worse than the previous one, would need to take place before the manifestation of the Avatar could occur. Meher Baba's disciple delivered this message to those around, as Meher Baba himself had been keeping silent for 2.5 years.
Poland, September 1939. The German foe begins its ruthless march of conquest and sets the stage for World War II. Poland's 34 million inhabitants, crushed, scattered, and enslaved. Tens of thousands of square miles of territory shrink before the movement of lightning-armored columns. Poland and the world learn the meaning of a grim new word, blitzkrieg.
The basic causes of the social turmoil that often precipitates into war may be found in the individual, the social whole, the functioning of Maya, and in the very intent of God's will. Inasmuch as these are essentially one in the final analysis, this means no more than that war is a part of the divine pattern. Regardless of the political and economic factors described by the historian as he looks at war in retrospect, from the spiritual point of view, this sanguine phenomenon is a cyclic divine ferment, over which no earthly power has control.
In the German broadcast on Thursday night, Hitler did not wait to hear comments on them, but ordered his troops to cross the Polish frontier the next morning. His action shows convincingly that there is no chance of expecting that this man will ever give up his practice of using force to gain his will. He can only be stopped by force. And we in France are today, in fulfillment of our obligations, going to the aid of Poland, who is so bravely resisting this wicked and unprovoked attack upon her people. We have a clear conscience. We have done all that any country could do to establish peace. But a situation in which no word given by Germany's ruler could be trusted, and no people or country could feel itself safe, had become intolerable. And now that we have resolved to finish it, I know that you will all play your part with calmness and courage.
It may readily be seen that most persons are immersed in their own egos and selfish viewpoints. This is the life of illusory values in which men are caught. If man were to face the truth, he would understand that all life is one, and in this understanding, forget the limiting self. But man does not face the truth, regarding himself as separate from, and competing with the rest of mankind.
Heute da stehen wir mit diesem Volk, leben wir, mit ihm sind wir verbunden auf Gedeih und auf Verderb. Dazu gar nichts beigetragen.
Bound by material interest and a limited viewpoint, they forget their divine destiny. They have truly lost their way, and so they lay savagely about themselves, for their hearts are torn by fear and hate.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us.
Throughout World War II, Meher Baba made many comments as he followed the war through the newspapers and radio. For instance, in 1939, when England and France entered the war, after Germany's invasion of Poland, Baba stated,
"I am glad war has begun. It is inevitable, essential, as a prelude to the great spiritual upheaval in the world. If it has its full run now, the world will witness a devastation it has never known. It will spread all over the world."
Everything we do is inspired by the absolute conviction that a great evil must be removed from the world. That evil is the spirit of faithlessness, of intolerance, of bullying, and of senseless criminal ambition embodied in Hitler and all those who surround him. That conviction is stronger even than the horror of the knowledge that civilized man must tackle the same task twice in 25 years.
and on another occasion, Baba said,
"It is impossible for Hitler to withdraw and stop at this stage. Even if he says to stop, the others won't, for they are determined to destroy the Nazis. Let us hope America comes through with money, etc. That will help a lot."
Germany occupies Copenhagen. Hitler's troops, disembarking from transports in the harbor, carry out the Führer's latest act of aggression, the invasion of peaceful and innocent Denmark. In this historic film, Movietone presents the first pictures of the Nazi Scandinavia. Pictures that prove the ease with which the German army took over the country and the humiliation which the Danes must have felt as the Nazi jackboot tramped from the harbor through the streets of the capital.
In April of 1940, Germany invaded the northern countries of Norway and Holland as a prelude to the invasion of France. Meher Baba was in Goa at that time, and the following story took place. Meher Baba and party passed the famous Catholic church of St. Francis Xavier, and Baba directed Elizabeth to inquire when the church would be open to view. Elizabeth stopped the car and went into a small restaurant next to the church to inquire. Shortly thereafter, she came out with an elderly man in a worn suit. He looked about 60, with a long grey beard and long hair. He told her in English the church was open at all times. Baba looked at the man and then departed. That evening, all went with Baba to see Francis Xavier's tomb. Just as they were about to return, the same old man walked up to Elizabeth and started a conversation. He told her he had come from Karachi, where he wrote plays, which were still unpublished. He had come to Goa to write. Baba asked the man if he needed anything, specifically money. The man replied, "No, thank you very much," and glanced quickly at Baba. Later that evening, Baba revealed to the group about the man, "You are all blind. He is very spiritually advanced and a conscious agent. All his talk about writing plays had hidden meaning meant for me. I gave him certain instructions internally, and tomorrow he will leave Goa." The next day, Elizabeth suddenly encountered the man again. He told her in a cryptic manner, "I don't know why, but I feel all on fire. Although I intended to stay in Goa for some months, I have to leave at once, for a cold country in the north." On June 1, 1940, Meher Baba secluded himself at Meherabad for his own internal work. He stated,
"I am retiring into seclusion for my work for the world. It is very important. I want to speed up situations and developments in the war. It will be a war of surprises and unexpected changes. It will change the map of the world. Disastrous results and unexpected consequences and development will bring about a quick turn of events. Destruction is essential for reconstruction. All evil is to be eradicated for good to be established."
Angesichts dieser unmittelbar bevorstehenden feindlichen Kriegsausweitung trat das deutsche Westheer am 10.
After the German invasion of Holland, Neville Chamberlain was replaced by Winston Churchill.
I sought an audience of the King this evening and tendered to him my resignation, which His Majesty has been pleased to accept. His Majesty has now entrusted to my friend and colleague, Mr. Winston Churchill, the task of forming a new administration on a national basis. And in this task, I have no doubt he will be successful.
Late May to early June 1940, Operation Dunkirk evacuates 334,000 trapped Allied soldiers from France in what was considered a miracle. Only 45,000 soldiers were expected to be saved.
Out from the hell that is Dunkirk, back from the steel thrust of the German war machine comes the BEF. They're worn out and footsore. They're hungry. For weeks they have been shelled and bombed from three sides. They had to stagger back to the sea to survive. They were betrayed, but never defeated or dispirited.
It was in conditions such as these that our men carried on with little or no rest, for days and nights on end, making trip after trip across the dangerous waters, bringing with them always men whom they had rescued. The numbers they have brought back are the measure of their devotion and their courage.
It may be readily seen then, that a solution to the individual and social factors underlying war rests upon the spiritual enlightenment of the individual. This need not mean that wars are inevitable as long as the ego self of the individual continues to ride rampant in the cultural and economic areas of life. For war is only the most explosive manifestation of the combined egocentricity of mankind. But conflict of one sort or another is inevitable until the ego self is finally tamed and eliminated.
We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
is a king neath beggar's clothes. The man of God is a treasure in a ruin. The man of God is not of wind and earth. The man of God is not of fire and water. The man of God is
William Donkin, an English medical doctor, lived with Meher Baba on and off throughout the war years and kept a personal diary. He is the author of Wayfarers, a chronicle of Meher Baba's work with masts. Masts are advanced souls who are on the inner planes and were used by Meher Baba in his work throughout the war years. Being on the inner planes, they could be used to direct forces on the physical plane. Meher Baba was directing the energy that these advanced souls generated, which is in magnitude far greater than a normal person possesses. Throughout the war, Baba worked with various musts in Bangalore, Mehrabad, and Ranchi, and also traveled thousands and thousands of miles throughout India to contact them in their own locations.
The man of God is a king neath beggar's clothes. The man
One exceptional must that Meher Baba used during the war years was Chatti Baba, who lived with Meher Baba from 1940 to 1942. The following story is from the Wayfarers, and as Dr. Donkin describes, shows that great saints are in harmony with humanity and suffer with them in their trials. For several weeks in Mehrabad, Chatti Baba, who had no access to newspapers or radio, had repeatedly stated that the people of Europe were undergoing great sorrow and suffering, but that they would survive to enjoy happy days again. One day he stated, that there would be much anguish and privation in the war, and that many would die of starvation, but that Babur would finally relieve the suffering of the world. On the night of the 9th of June, 1940, in the midst of the Nazi occupation of France, Chattu Babur became suddenly violent, noisy, and abusive. He emerged in a state of disorder and frenzy from his little room and went directly to Babur's room and declared that his house had now been utterly destroyed and that he had come for shelter to Babur. Babur at once gave orders for the two to be left alone, and Chattu Babur was upset for hours. Eventually he became quiet and spent the rest of the night with Babur. The following morning Babur explained that Chattu Babur, who had a spiritual connection with France, had been overwrought with despair because of the predicament that was overwhelming France. As the war continued, Chattu Babur was often heard crying out, "Save them! Oh please, save them!" On June 10, 1940, Meher Babur commented on the war. He stated,
"If Italy joins the war, there will be a world war. There will be utter destruction and chaos, just as I want. Then people will feel the hollowness, the emptiness of it all, and turn to God."
That same day,
La dichiarazione di guerra è già stata consegnata agli ambasciatori.
Italy declared war. The next day, Babur stated,
"From this mass destruction, I will build a new life, and one quite different from now. One that is much happier and better. All who die in this war will take form again and enjoy this peace."
On the 10th of July 1940, the Battle of Britain began, and Winston Churchill addressed the nation via radio.
The peoples of Europe will not be ruled for long by the Nazi Gestapo, nor will the world yield itself to Hitler's gospel of hatred, appetite, and domination. And now it has come to us. Stand alone in the breach and face the worst that the tyrant's might and enmity can do. Bearing ourselves humbly before God, but conscious that we serve an unfolding purpose, we are ready to defend our native land against the invasion by which it is threatened. We are fighting by ourselves alone, but we are not fighting for ourselves alone.
Babur commented that he liked Churchill's speech and that at last Hitler has met his match. He said Churchill is a great leader. On the 26th of July, Babur stated,
"This war is a big drama. There is the hero, heroine, and villain all playing their parts in the drama. It is not Hitler's fault if he is playing the villain in God's drama. It's good he is acting his part well. I like villains, heroes, angels, devils, anyone who acts their parts perfectly."
22nd of September, as the Battle of Britain continued,
Barber said in response to a comment made about how bad the war was.
What is bad about it? The war is teaching people to be brave, to be able to suffer, to sacrifice.
Later that day, while sitting under the tin shed, Barber asked for pencil and paper and drew the following picture, and then dictated on his alphabet board.
Here, they fight. Here they are one. But whatever happens, happens according to God's will. If you have this firmly embedded in your mind, then you will understand that this war business is nothing but God's game.
From January 1940 to February 1941, Meher Barber traveled an exhausting 5,000 miles throughout India in third-class trains, seeking out and contacting musts. During this period, while he was in Delhi, Barber had a few hours to spare before the next train and took his Mandeli to see a new Charlie Chaplin film called The Great Dictator. Barber loved the movie very much. He stated, "It is the only film I would like to see 7 times. He sent a letter back to Mehrabad instructing that everyone should see the movie, and those under his instructions to not see movies were allowed to see this one if possible.
Hannah, can you hear me? Wherever you are, look up, Hannah. The clouds are lifting. The sun is breaking through. We are coming out of the darkness into the light. We are coming into a new world, a kindlier world, where men will rise above their hate, their greed, and brutality. Look up, Hannah. The soul of man has been given wings, and at last he is beginning to fly. He is flying into the rainbow, into the light of hope, into the future, the glorious future that belongs to you, to me, and to all of us. Look up, Hannah. Look up.
On the 22nd of June 1941, Hitler's armies invaded the Soviet Union and began a disastrous war on the Eastern Front that would last 4 years. Of the estimated 70 million deaths attributed to World War II, over 30 million, many of them civilian, occurred on the Eastern Front. World War II was the deadliest military conflict in history. An estimated total of 80 million people died, which was about 3% of the world's population.
In the Soviet Union, 26 million people died, 8 million died of starvation.
In China, 18 million died, of which 7 million people died of starvation. In Germany, 7 million people died. In Poland, 5 million. In Japan, 3 million. England and America lost 500,000 people each. 62 countries were involved, and 2.5 times more civilians died than soldiers. This all occurred in just 6 years.
The disease of selfishness in mankind will need a cure that is not only universal in application, but drastic in nature. Selfishness is so deep-rooted, that it can be eradicated only by being attacked from all sides. Real peace and happiness will dawn spontaneously, when selfishness is purged.
On October 17, 1941, Sadhguru Upasana Maharaj and Avatar Meher Baba met for the first time in 18 years. They met alone for 30 minutes in a hut, in a secluded mango orchard, and they discussed the war, the breaking of Meher Baba's silence, and other topics. Upasani concluded by declaring that they would not meet again, and I leave everything to you. All the work and powers of the 5 realized masters are focused on you. That evening, when pressed by his disciples, Baba told them what happened in the meeting. Baba dictated,
I can bring down the stars. I now have full powers. Maharaj has handed over his side of things to me.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
In December 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, drawing America into the war. 2 weeks after America entered the war, Sadhguru Upasana Maharaj dropped his body. Baba said that his position in the spiritual hierarchy was assumed by a man in Tibet. One of the 5 realized masters, Narayan Maharaj, was also focused on the war. He wanted to know all the phases of the battles, and had a disciple prepare a daily report. He kept a map of Europe and followed the progress of the war. Mysterious wounds would appear on his body, and he would have trouble walking and eating, but he would not discuss the connection between the war and his wounds.
Wars are the work of Maya, and are either spiritually disastrous or beneficial, depending on whether they are based on attachment to or detachment from the hold of Maya.
The selection process carried out by SS doctors and wardens took place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as train after train unloaded its human cargo. Men to the left, women to the right. Most Jews were sent immediately to the left, to their death. They were told that before being placed in the camp, they had to be disinfected and washed. They would soon discover that what they had assumed were the shower areas were actually hermetically sealed gas chambers.
Wohin auch das Auge blicket, Moor und Heide nur ringsum, Vogelsang uns nicht erquicket, Eichen stehen kahl und krumm. Wir sind immer Soldaten und ziehen mit dem Spaten ins Moor. Wir sind immer Soldaten und ziehen mit dem Spaten ins Moor. Auf und nieder gehen die Posten, keiner kann hindurch. Flucht wird nur das Leben kosten, vierfach ist umzäunt die Burg. Wir sind immer Soldaten und ziehen mit dem Spaten ins Moor. Wir sind immer.
During war, great forces of destruction are afoot, which at times might seem to be dominant. But constructive forces for the redemption of humanity are also released through various channels. Though the working of these latter forces are largely silent, eventually they are bound to bring about the transformation that will render safe and steady the further spiritual progress of humanity.
As a Member of Parliament with 9 others visited Buchenwald concentration camp. Some people believe that the reports of what happened there are exaggerated. No words could exaggerate. We saw and we know. We were able to speak freely with internees and to hear their stories. You will now see a few of the sights we saw, and much as they may shock you, do believe me when I tell you that the reality was indescribably worse than these pictures. You cannot photograph suffering, only its results. In pictures you have no smell of disease and death. Here you see no more than a fragment of the full pattern of horror.
If I have made mistakes in my work through a false conception of obedience, if I carried out orders, all of which, insofar as they are alleged to be cardinal orders, were issued before my time of office, then they are part of a fate which is stronger than myself and which is carrying me along with it.
Nobody of us is spared suffering at one time or another. But everybody, in the midst of suffering, is given a chance to bear testimony of the human potential at its best, which is to turn a personal tragedy into a human triumph.
The soul remains untouched and unscathed by the loss and the destruction of material things and possessions, and death is only a gateway to further life. Those who would play their part in the divine game shall remain unmoved by any bereavements or losses, and they shall also impart to others the spirit of cheerful resignation to the divine will. The ununderstood sufferings of war will embitter many souls. They need to be helped in the restoration of unassailable faith and imperishable sweetness of life. Those who are initiated into the eternal values of inner life shall bear the burden of dispelling unwarranted gloom and depression, and cheer up those who are in anguish.
In February 1942, Meher Baba dictated 4 new messages: violence and non-violence, action and inaction, the spiritual significance of the present war, and the need for creative leadership in India. Baba wanted these 4 messages to be delivered to the leaders of India. He chose Chonji and Jal Karawala for this task and sent them to Delhi on the 23rd of March. Chonji and Jal spent a week contacting about 30 prominent leaders such as Gandhi, Jinnah, Nehru, Rajaji and Stafford Cripps, who was an English Member of Parliament sent to India, to secure Indians' full cooperation in the war effort by promising full independence afterward. They delivered printed copies of Meher Baba's 4 messages to each of them. Chonji and Jal returned successfully to Dehradun and informed Baba of the work they did. Baba remarked, "At this significant period when the future of India is being discussed and decided, I had to contact the leaders who participated in these discussions through you both. It was all according to God's plan. They will now make decisions according to the thoughts and wisdom God will give them." God's plan is always for the best, and although at times things appear to be going wrong, in fact, it is not so. Meher Baba's message, the spiritual significance of the present war, is the original source of the messages in this film.
This war is bringing vast amount of suffering and destruction to millions of people. But all this will not be in vain. Out of this chaos there will emerge a new world of freedom and happiness and understanding. From the spiritual point of view of the last and the only truth, all souls are, in their essence, fundamentally one. War cannot create any real cleavage or division between the people who are fighting with each other. The people of the warring countries seem to be different from each other merely by virtue of having different bodies and minds. But from the point of view of their souls, all differences are not only secondary but false. The spiritual unity of all souls remains inviolable in spite of all wars, and from the point of view of ultimate reality, it remains true that no soul is really at war with any other soul.
My fellow Americans, last night, when I spoke with you, I knew at that moment that troops of the United States and our allies were crossing the Channel in another and greater operation. It has come to pass with success thus far. And so, in this poignant hour, I ask you to join with me in prayer. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity.
The weather was a critical factor in the invasion of Normandy. It required a full moon and clear skies for the planes to see their targets. It required a tide high enough for the ships to get near the beaches, but low enough to see the mines laid by the Germans. The initial date set for D-Day was June the 5th, 1944. However, the weather forecast was not favorable at all, as storms were rolling in over the English Channel. At this same time, the weather was pouring in Meherzad, the new home of Meher Baba. Margaret, an English woman, was staying there, taking care of a Siamese cat, which was given to her by Meher Baba to look after. One night in the downpour, Meher Baba inexplicably took the trouble to go out in the rain to tell Margaret to put the cat out of her room and into the downpour. Margaret, who was not accustomed to denying Baba, pleaded that it would not be good for the cat to go out in the cold and dark rain. Baba relented and went back to his room. The next night, June the 6th, General Eisenhower needed to make a tough decision: to venture across the Channel in the stormy weather or to postpone the invasion of France for at least 2 more weeks. To postpone could be disastrous for the 2-year planning of the secret invasion. That night at Meherazad, Meher Baba once again went out in the pouring rain to tell Margaret to put the cat out in the storm. Margaret again hesitated. This time Meher Baba became adamant and with the full force of his personality questioned her, "Is this my cat or yours?" Overwhelmed by Baba's force, she replied, "Yours," and immediately took the cat and sent it out into the stormy weather. In England, General Eisenhower paced back and forth, and finally made his decision with an, "Okay, we'll go," and commenced the invasion through the stormy waves and across the Channel, and the mission to save Europe began. The British and American forces were able to use a small window of opportunity, in the break of the weather, to cross the Channel and land on the beaches of Normandy.
Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savagely. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
During a war, there are persons who unveil their inherent higher self through the endurance of pain, and by acts of bravery and self-sacrifice. It is better that such unselfish action be released under the stimulus of danger, than that it should not be released at all. It is better that men forget their petty selves, under the pressure of the collective calamity, if need be, than remain permanently absorbed in fear and greed. The final level, from which the causes of war spring, is no level at all. For it is a part of the divine plan of God, to give to a hungry and weary world a fresh dispensation of the eternal and only truth.
A 1939 letter from Einstein to President Roosevelt explaining the potential of a new type of bomb. It is conceivable, though much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs of a new type may thus be constructed. In order to test the bomb, on July 16, 1945, the first nuclear bomb was detonated in a desert in New Mexico, in the southwest United States.
he should do his duty, and to impress him, takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
10 days after the test, Japan was given an ultimatum agreed to at the Potsdam Conference by Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, Harry Truman, and others. Surrender the war, or face inevitable and complete destruction. The atomic bomb was not mentioned in the ultimatum. Japan refused to surrender by not responding to the ultimatum.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction.
This is Hiroshima, the day after the atom bomb exploded over Japan's seventh largest city and etched its message of doom to an empire. These films, taken by the Japs and confiscated after the armistice, tell a dramatic story of destruction and terror that followed in the wake of the first atom bomb loosed over a military target. 30% of the city's population was killed, some by radioactive gamma rays and others by the heat of radiation that showed its intensity in many freakish ways.
The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold, and the end is not yet. In their present form, these bombs are now in production, and even more powerful forms are in development. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe.
105,000 people died from the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and another 95,000 were injured. It is estimated that over 1 million soldiers would have died on each side if the US troops invaded Japan as intended. According to Donald Donkin's diary, when Barber heard of the atomic bombs being dropped, he was frightfully pleased that so much destruction could take place at one time.
There are always 2 aspects of divinity that are eternally active in the affairs of the world. The destructive aspect of divinity is termed self-glorification, and the constructive aspect, self-beatitude. During the phase of self-glorification, divinity repels itself, so to speak, through its own creation. While in the phase of self-beatitude, divinity attracts or loves itself, through its own creation. Both must be regarded ultimately as instruments of divine wisdom, to rouse humanity to its divine heritage of self-realization. When the individual or the race is about to lapse into bestiality, it is suffering that rehabilitates them.
The day of days for America and her allies. Crowds before the White House await the announcement from the President that the Japs have surrendered unconditionally.
After the 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, Emperor Hirohito agreed to the Potsdam Declaration, on August 15, 1945. On September 2nd, the final surrender ceremony was held, and World War II came to its end.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. A world founded upon faith and understanding. Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always.
Tens of thousands of proud American flags dotted the square. Far into the night, the happy crowd screamed their relief at the end of the greatest war in history. From early Tuesday morning, the celebration went on for 24 hours. New York never celebrated like this before, but never did they have a better reason.
On the very next day, September 3rd, Narayan Maharaj, although in good health, declared that the war was over and his work was done. He gave his devotees a final mantra, went to his room, sat in a lotus position, and left this world forever.
People who make unlimited sacrifices for the sake of their country or political ideology are also capable of the same sacrifices for God and the truth. As war teaches that even the man in the street can rise to the greatest heights of sacrifice for a selfless cause, it also teaches that all the mundane things of the world, wealth, possessions, power, fame, family, and even the very tenor of life on earth, are transitory and devoid of lasting value. In this manner, the incidents of war also win man over for God, through the lessons they bring. It is now high time that universal suffering should hasten humanity to the turning point in its spiritual history. It is now high time that the very agonies of our times should become a means for the bringing of real understanding of human relationship. It is now high time for humanity to face squarely the true causes of the catastrophe of war. It is now high time to seek a new experience of reality. It is high time that men have a fresh vision that all life is one in God, who alone is real, and all that matters. God is worth living for, and He is worth dying for. All else is a vain and empty pursuit of illusory value.